The ghost puppet, Blade's deadly secret hit, began, as many hauntings do, with the sound of wood not breaking, but breathing. Somewhere in the derelict heart of a city long past its prime, a forgotten puppet theater slumbered behind a veil of dust. The building leaned as if exhausted by time, its painted facade cracked by rain and neglect. Above the door hung a rusted sign, Marionette, House of Leclerc, Wonders of the Living String. No one had entered for 50 years, yet sometimes passers-by swore they saw a faint light flicker through the boards at night, a pulse, soft and deliberate, like the blink of an unseen eye. Inside that theater, amidst webs and rotting velvet, lay a glass cabinet that held the puppet they called Blade. He was carved of pale ash wood, so fine-grained that under the moon he seemed almost translucent. His face elongated, expressionless, bore eyes made of obsidian, not painted, real stones, polished to a black so deep it seemed to swallow light. His mouth was fixed in an almost smile, and in his right hand gleamed a miniature blade, thin, precise, stainless steel, the only thing in that decaying theater that had not rusted. They said he was the masterpiece of Jacques Leclerc, the puppeteer who vanished during his final performance in 1903. They said the puppet had moved on its own that night, cutting its own strings, stepping down from the stage like a child descending from a dream. No one saw what happened next, only screams, a thud, and the shattering of the oil lamps. When the townspeople broke down the door, they found the theater empty. Only one thing remained on stage, Blade, sitting upright on a stool, his black eyes staring into the wings as if watching something the living could not. Jacques Leclerc had once been the most celebrated puppeteer in Europe. His shows toured Paris, Vienna, Prague, places that adored the macabre theater of the marionette. But fame is a strange disease. It whispers that your art must be eternal, and so Leclerc began to search for a way to make his puppets live forever. He experimented with clockwork, with mercury joints, with mechanical hearts made of coiled spring and tension wire, but none of it satisfied him. His puppets could move, but they could not feel, and so he turned, as desperate artists often do, to forbidden craft whispers from the occult fringes of Paris, where alchemists met in the catacombs to speak of animation and exchange of soul. A notebook was found decades later in the cellar beneath the theater. Its pages were covered in equations and invocations, diagrams of nerves beside marionette strings. Notes like these, scrawled in madness: to move without touch, to see without eyes. The soul is the puppeteer, the flesh, a vessel. One name was written repeatedly in the margins, Agnes, the name of his late wife, who had died suddenly during childbirth. Some believed he had carved Blade in her memory. Others whispered a darker tale, that he carved it with her. On the final night of Leclerc's life, the theater was sold out. The posters promised a new act, a puppet that moves without strings. Witnesses would later describe the opening act as mesmerizing. The usual marionettes, graceful and tragic, their strings invisible in the lamplight. But then the stage went dark, save for a single spotlight. Leclerc emerged, pale and trembling, carrying a glass case. Inside was Blade. He set the puppet upon the table and whispered something the audience could not hear. The curtain rustled, as if stirred by breath. Then movement, not a twitch of string or jerk of limb, but a natural fluid turning of the head. Gasps rippled through the theater. The puppet's eyes seemed alive. They darted, blinked. No, not blinked, contracted. Then the puppet raised its hand and pointed to the audience. A scream. A woman fainted, and before anyone could react, the lamps shattered. When the lights returned, Leclerc was gone. The puppet sat alone on the stage, its blade dripping with something dark. The theater was condemned within the year, but Blade did not disappear. He passed from collector to collector, always at a price far too high for a toy. In 1926, a Viennese occultist named Dr. Ulrich Klempt purchased the puppet for study. Within weeks, his journals became erratic, references to whispering joints and dreams where my fingers are strings. Then, abruptly, they ceased. When police entered his home, they found no body, only the puppet, sitting at his desk, its small wooden hand resting on an open notebook. The blade reflects what the heart conceals. The final line read, "I can no longer tell which of us is the real one." In 1998, two art restoration students, Mara and Julian, stumbled upon the puppet in an antique warehouse outside Lyon. They were cataloging relics from the Leclerc estate for an exhibition titled Ghosts of the Stage. The puppet was in remarkable condition, despite a century of neglect. Its joints flexible, its eyes gleaming. The curator warned them not to touch the blade's superstition. He said, laughing, but Mara, entranced by its craftsmanship, ran her fingers along the hilt. She claimed it was warm. That night, she began to dream of strings tightening around her wrists. She saw the theater empty, echoing, and Leclerc standing in the dark, whispering, "You wanted to see what I saw, then see." The next morning, Julian found Mara unresponsive at her desk, her eyes open, pupils dilated, her hands stiffly raised as if grasping invisible cords. The puppet sat before her, its blade resting gently across her palm. What gives an object its soul? The question haunted those who studied blade. There were theories: psychological, paranormal, artistic. Some said the puppet was merely a mirror, that its haunting reflected the guilt of whoever possessed it. Others argued that Leclerc had succeeded in creating a true homunculus, a body that contained a fragment of human consciousness. But one entry in Leclerc's recovered notebook suggests something deeper, a passage written in his final days: "The blade must taste blood to awaken. It must cut not the flesh, but the bond between soul and matter." Two scholars of ritual alchemy, this line was unmistakable. Leclerc had not summoned a spirit, he had transferred one. The puppet was not haunted by a ghost, it was the ghost. In 2012, a paranormal research team filmed a documentary inside the ruins of Leclerc's theater. The footage was never broadcast, but leaked segments appeared online years later. The first hour shows typical exploration: thermal cameras, EVP recorders, nervous laughter. But near midnight, they discover the glass cabinet in the basement, unbroken, its hinges rusted shut. Inside, the puppet, one crew member, a sound technician, jokes, "Come on, Blade, give us a show." Then a thump, the audio spikes. A shadow moves behind the cabinet, not outside it, but within the reflection of the glass. And in that reflection, for just a frame, appears another face beside the puppet's, pale, elongated, mouth open in a silent scream. The team fled, leaving their equipment behind. Only one returned to retrieve it the next day. He reported finding the cabinet empty. The secret of Blade was not in its weapon, but in its creation, hidden beneath its wooden skull. Restorers discovered a cavity lined with parchment, human skin, according to forensic analysis. Inscribed upon it was a sigil, identical to one used in 18th century necromantic rites. It was a binding mark, designed to trap a soul. Scholars now believe Leclerc used the essence of his dying wife, or perhaps the child she carried, to animate his puppet, a desperate act of resurrection gone wrong. In that light, Blade's deadly secret is not murder, it is grief, a grief so strong it refused to die, carving itself into wood and wire, using the stage as its afterlife. Every hand that touched the puppet became part of that grief, a string, invisible but unbreakable, connecting the living to the dead. There are those who claim to have seen the puppet perform again. In 2021, a small traveling theater in Prague staged a revival of Leclerc's lost play, The Marionette of the Moon. The director, an eccentric named Hav, claimed to have discovered the original prop during the performance. Something extraordinary occurred. Midway through the act, as the puppet raised its arm, all four strings attached to it snapped simultaneously. Yet, it did not fall, it kept moving, gracefully, deliberately. The audience gasped, then screamed as the puppet turned its head toward them. Someone recorded it on a phone, the puppet's eyes glinting under the stage light, the small blade catching the reflection of 100 faces. And then, silence. The video ends with the camera tumbling, the image fracturing into static. When police arrived, the theater was empty. On stage, a single object remained, the puppet's blade, embedded in the wooden floor, still vibrating as if from a recent strike.
There is a saying among puppeteers: every string is a promise. It connects life to art, creator to creation. But what happens when the strings are cut? Perhaps that is what makes Blade so terrifying. Not that he moves without strings, but that he reminds us we, too, are pulled by invisible cords. Grief, ambition, obsession, these are the strings of the human soul. Leclerc cut his believing he could master life and death. But the truth of the ghost puppet is this: once you cut your strings, you are no longer free. You are lost, drifting in the void between maker and made. And in that void, something still stirs, a shadow with obsidian eyes, searching for new hands to guide, new hearts to carve hollow. If you visit the ruins of the old theater today, the locals will warn you not to linger after dusk. They say you might hear faint tapping wood against glass, or see the shimmer of a blade in the moonlight. Some claim that if you bring a puppet into that place, it begins to move differently, as if aware of being watched. One woman who spent the night there left a note scrawled on the wall before vanishing. "He does not need strings anymore. He needs eyes." There's a story told among modern puppeteers, a quiet superstition passed backstage before every performance. They say that when the lights go out, every puppet dreams, and in their dreams, there is always a theater, a single spotlight, and a man in the dark, whispering, "Dance for me, my love, one last time." No one knows who began the legend, but sometimes, when the curtain falls and the audience departs, you might hear one last sound, soft, rhythmic, like applause, or perhaps it is something else. The sound of wood breathing, of strings tightening, of the blade remembering its purpose. Some hauntings are not born of hatred, but of longing. Blade's deadly secret is not a tale of vengeance. It is the tragedy of love refusing to rest, of an artist's inability to let go of what he lost. And so the ghost puppet remains, not just in the ruins of Leclerc's theater, but in every story told about him. Every whispered retelling reanimates the strings. Every frightened eye gives him form. For ghosts do not live in places, they live in the telling dot. And tonight, as you read these words, somewhere in the dark, a puppet's head tilts ever so slightly, listening.